got back, it was
Oh,
in
nice, yeah, man, all that.
full house, life mode.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Manufacturing still water. Called Forest Lake lost revenue. Really lost. Worst decision ever.
All right, we're at 6 o'clock, so let's get started, and join if you will roll, and if you're able, please stand for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right, item 4, open forum. Doesn't appear that anyone's here this evening to speak on that, so we will move right into discussion items. And 5A, local option sales tax. Ellie.
So we partnered with the University of Minnesota to have them conduct a study on a local option sales tax analysis. And so with that, the entire study is within your packet. We're just gonna go through a high-level PowerPoint overview, talk about the impacts, and talk about resident versus non-residential. And with that being said, this is off of a 0.5% sales tax. So when we look to calculate this, the U factors in a couple different things. This is per capita sales in Minnesota, population of Forest Lake, index income, and like I mentioned, that 0.5 sales tax. They also base this off of compared actuals versus potential and identify opportunities or gaps. And so the way they did this is they put together this study and then they had about an hour meeting with Mark and myself, and we ran through scenarios. What is in Forest Lake that causes people to want to come here? Where do you shop? What do you eat for? What are reasons people would leave Forest Lake? And so those are the other identifying opportunities or gaps. Yeah.
How did we land on the 0.5, just out of curiosity? I didn't see that back yet.
So the 0.5 is what they are putting together for standard options. This is what they're seeing across the board. With this being said, this is what the entire analysis is broken down on. They provided us the information, so if you would like to see the impacts of a 0.25, 0.75, but they said this is what they're seeing through all of the other studies that they've all put together.
I would say just anecdotally, I would say 80 to 90% of the sales taxes in Minnesota are 0.5%. Some are quarters, some I think it was one that was even 1%, but almost all of them are 0.5.
Okay, all right, thanks.
And so for context, when they're looking at the city of Forest Lake, they're seeing roughly 6,000 people coming in on a daily basis to come to Forest Lake to work, to do that 8 to 5 life. And then they're seeing about 1,500 people staying in Forest Lake for those core business hours, and then close to 9,000 people heading out of Forest Lake for that 9 to 5. The arrows aren't in the direction these people are moving, they're just to demonstrate coming in and coming out. And from that data, we were able to see that the sales tax that is generated through the Minnesota Department of Revenue for the city of Forest Lake has almost doubled from 2014. When speaking with Eric from the University of Minnesota, he said that this is exponential growth compared to what a lot of the other cities are seeing. He said most cities staggered out, but he also said this factors into population increasing and Forest Lake continuing to develop out. And so he said, based off this, we can assume that sales tax will then continue to increase as we continue to develop as a city and increase our population.
So what is this paragraph telling us?
This is the overall sales tax generated within Forest Lake.
This would be the sales that are sales tax eligible.
Okay.
So we'll be getting 0.5% of this.
Yeah, so you're saying the sales in Forest Lake that are sales tax eligible have gone from 282 million to 421 million.
Yep.
Correct.
And then with that, they break it down into 2 major categories. These are retail only, so those would be your shopping and things like that. And then you have your retail services, haircuts, things along those lines. You can see the dip from the pandemic. This is very common. They said that the biggest thing is that you can see our trends are bouncing back. A lot of cities then stabled out after the pandemic, but we are still continuing to grow. So what does the sales tax break down to for resident versus non-resident? Right now, for Forest Lake, we are looking at roughly 46.6% of that sales tax is generated by residents, and 53.4% is non-resident. With the assumption that this would generate in 2023 an additional roughly $2 million, plus an additional 10% of online revenue. Online revenue isn't immediately counted within the sales tax forecast because it doesn't need to be counted within the way it's reported. And so when they're doing these numbers, you can assume to add that 10% onto that roughly $2 million. And that breaks down to $44.86 per resident. Our major categories: building materials, general merchandise, and then bars and restaurants. Questions? So then when we look at projections and we continue to move out from 2023, we can see that that projection line is increasing. And so as Eric mentioned throughout the entire presentation, Forest Lake is a growing city, and we can see the sales tax trend continuing to increase. He would assume in 2023, we would get $2 million based on this 0.5, and that will then only continue to grow as the city continues to increase its size. This was a really high-level presentation. The packet and the study itself, I think, is close to 50 pages. Any questions?
Maybe, and I don't know who would want it, but maybe for the public's, viewing or whatever, just the reason why we're going through this.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I think we should just kind of go through that. I mean, right now, as everybody knows, we're contemplating the construction of a new public works facility in 2027. That the anticipated cost of that building is far greater than we had budgeted for a number of years ago, and we have not yet ended on the scope of that work yet. We don't know the final cost of that, but it's safe to say it's going to be more than we had programmed into our CIP. And so a number of months ago, when we came to this realization, conversations with the council revolved around how are we going to pay for that. It became obvious after we saw the report on our existing facilities, that there wasn't an option to delay this much, right? I mean, we really do need a new facility. The question is, how can we pay for that in a responsible way? And all options are on the table, and so we looked at one of those options being a sales tax. Recently, the city of Oakdale did this very similar scope project and ended up having their community be in favor of using a sales tax to fund that project. The advantages, of course, are that as we see from this study, and we didn't necessarily know this until you do this study, that a majority of our sales tax revenue would come from folks who do not pay taxes otherwise in the city of Forest Lake, so do not pay property taxes here. And so it would reduce the burden on Forest Lake taxpayers. Still, certainly 45% or so would still come from the taxpayers, but that's different than 100%. And that's pretty much every other scenario you look at to fund this would be 100% from the citizens of Forest Lake. So there's a totally separate decision about, do we build a public works facility and for how much, and to what size and scope. But the secondary decision is, once you decide to do that, how can you pay for that, and what's the most judicious way to pay for that? And I think what we're doing right now is studying that and keeping that option on the table. And at the next city council meeting, because of the deadlines that are in place in terms of getting this in front of the legislature, which is the next step in that exploratory process, we will have some resolutions for the council to support going forward with this sales tax. But I want the public to understand that that's just sort of enough of a step to keep us in that timeline and able to do this. It doesn't commit us to doing anything, and in fact, the process requires both legislative approval and community approval through a vote. So this would be something that would be as a referendum to do this, implement the sales tax. Other funding mechanisms that would be an option for the Public Works Department may not carry with it that referendum portion of it, right? So, if the public's evaluating what they feel is maybe the best way to pay for this, so the pros and cons are In the pro category here, you have an opportunity to vote as a citizen on this, in terms of how to fund it, and then you, have the number of, large percentage of the population from outside the community helping to pay for it, so, again, just an option, and, plenty of steps to go through, but we do need to kind of keep on a timeline to be able to keep our name in the hat for that, opportunity if it comes along.
And then with that, this is also a timeframe sales tax, so it wouldn't be indefinitely, when we do submit those proposals, within the resolution, it would state, we are looking to have this go for X amount of years to generate with the assumption of this much revenue.
Excellent point, and then additionally, it is project specific, so we would need to name this particular project. You could name other projects, but actually, if you named other projects, each of those would have a referendum vote on them during the election, so that, let's say you just making up something, you're gonna build a swimming facility. The Public Works Department would have a vote, the swimming facility would have a vote. I'm not proposing a swimming facility.
I'm glad you
But,
did.
but you can see that, you know, some cities will propose a number of them, because as long as you're at it, let's go for a big thing. At this point, my recommendation to you, and what I've heard from you so far is that we're focused on this facility, and it's of the size and scope that it warrants this discussion. And right now, that's the only thing that we have on the near-term radar.
So this breakdown of resident to non-resident, I'm personally not terribly surprised by that. That'll probably wasn't anybody's terribly surprised. My question is how does that stack up to communities like Oakdale or some of these other communities that have passed that? Is this kind of in alignment with their breakdown? Do we have any sense of that?
Yeah, so what Eric did say is he did say that anything above that 50% for non-residents is marking in the good category or favorable category. He is seeing that more ladder towards being a bulk of the residents, and then all sitting within that 40 to 50% swing though, but anything that ladders above that 50 is what they are labeling as favorable.
Maybe just another question on this, the second bar there. So based on 2023 taxable sales of $400-some million, 0.5% generates 2 million. And so of that 2 million, we're saying that roughly 47% of that's coming from the residents. So 2 million is the number, right, that we would anticipate based on 2023 numbers. And so 47% of 2 million equates to basically $45 a resident. Is that
Correct.
tracking? Okay. So for a household of 4, we're talking $200 or per adult.
Per resident, so they base it off of our population. So if you are counted within the population, then you would be a resident.
Have we, at this point, gone to the level of knowing what that, let's say it's just 50 million, you throw this into the levy, what that would equate to the average household, that medium market value household, and how that would compare, let's say it's 4, is that $700 a year, is it 500 versus, to Lay's point, $200?
No, we haven't done that math to equate it to, what the average house would, look at in terms of property tax. I think you can kind of do the reverse math here a little bit, right? A household of 3, which would be the average household 2.7 usually or so. You know, the 50-some% of that would then become your burden as a property taxpayer, would go on there. So you're, you know, maybe it's $150 a household or so. Just ballparking off that math there and using 3 people. So in that order of magnitude.
When this goes in front of the council next Monday, we can break down for if we do 2.5%, and then based off of the assumption of what our public works building would cost and what we have built in that 10-year plan, if we could reduce revenues by this $2 million each year, we can break down that levy, what that would do to the levy from a tangible standpoint, if that's what you're looking for.
I think so, you know, I guess idea behind this is that, you know, this building is gonna support roads that not just Forest Lake residents are on. I mean, we are a hub, and so you have residents from all over the region coming in here using these roads that, again, this building supports. And so, you know, if this, you know, you look at these numbers, and if we equate that to what it would be per household on a property tax thing, I think it should. I mean, I'm just assumptions here that, you know, the residents would be in a much better favorable position by doing this and approving this sales tax than putting this burden strictly on the residents. And so if we can tell that story somehow, or at least early on get that number so that we can make that decision, make it easier to make that decision, I think would be helpful.
I think, Mark, help me out here, if I took $2 million off of our current levy, what would that decrease it by?
Yeah, our current levy is 16 something, right? So, whatever the math on that is, 1/8. 12%.
So we'd be able to decrease the levy by that 1.8% each year if we have an additional $2 million of revenue.
Right, but it would just be on this project. What would define, like, what is the part of the levy in that 50 million?
Yeah,
And
so-
kind of extrapolate that out to be,
This is bad math because we haven't yet added in the bond payment. When I
Right.
say $16 million levy, that's now, we need to add 2 million plus to get a bond payment for a 50 million-ish building. So we're really talking maybe more about 18 million.
Well, I think we had that in the 10-year plan, I think
Yeah.
we tried to pull
We
one
did.
for next
We
week.
did.
so it should cover, I mean, based on these numbers, that should cover that bond payment?
Not quite,
For the most
not
part?
quite, but a good chunk of it, right? And, remember, when you're doing math here, we're not talking about 50 divided by 2, because we have interest payments, and the actual cost of that loan will be much more than 50, right? So we have this is not just 25 years, at 2 million and you get to 50. So we're not you're likely not going to wanna have this go on for 30, 40 years to pay all that back, right? There'll probably be a combination of taxpayer money, property taxpayer money to offset some of that too, right? And I think that's most fair, right? I mean, I think this isn't a complete regional facility, it's a shared facility, right?
Well, the whole 50 is not paid out of the general fund, it happens. Or
Yeah.
It's out of
For sure,
sewer and water, it's already been
for sure.
programmed in.
Yeah.
So,
We can put in the council packet for Monday, not back with the napkin math, and we can break it down for us. That is easy. We can even throw a slide together and talk about it in a council setting, so it's very transparent of what the impacts of it could be.
And we will do all that. I wanna try to refocus the question that will be in front of us next week though, which is not so much, do we wanna do this and then add that 0.5% and da-da-da-da-da. The question is this compel you enough? The fact that 55% of this income will come from out of the city, is that compelling? And the general dollar amount, is it quote unquote worth it, right, to pursue this? I think, in my view, the answer is yes. You have a compelling reason that this isn't 10% of that coming from outside, this is 55%. This isn't $100,000 a year, this is 2 million, right? So knowing those numbers and the magnitude of those numbers, and that, in my view, would compel you to say, yes, let's go to the next step, right? Those other questions about exactly how much and how long is it gonna take to pay off and all those type of things are probably questions for us down the line as we make that final decision as to whether or not to really pursue this thing. Not that there can't be good discussion points now, but I think the inflection point here is, did the study show us that this is worth at least continuing down this road? And I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, and it just, maybe this is get a little ahead, but maybe Mark, if you would, some of the conversations that you and I have had with our local legislative people, and maybe more of an update about where we think the state's gonna go on this thing.
Yeah, so, it's been a lot of talk, with the folks that watch the legislature for us, our Metro Cities partners. The University University of Minnesota. The reason we weren't able to produce this information for you, say, a month ago, which we would have hoped to, is that we didn't get this until Thursday or Friday last week. And it's because they've got, it sounds like a number of these proposals that are in front of them. The university does, everybody goes to them to get this information. We're advised by the legislature to do that. And so it sounds like their plate was pretty full with requests. And so we anticipate that there'll be a large ask at the legislature this year. We do know also that the city of Blaine has a very large singular ask that they're looking to do to help bolster their downtown plan. And we think that that regional, that large ask will help us other communities with smaller asks be viable candidates for a sales tax as well. It's a little tough, I think, to approve something like that for the people who already have a very large and thriving city, and then to leave others, folks that are in a little bit different position, population and growth-wise, behind, so to speak. We do know that there's a lot of work that they were trying to do last session in terms of, there was a movement in the legislature to take this out of the legislature's hands and sort of enact some rules that would be sort of hard, fast rules. You can get a sales tax if you meet these criteria, and that the legislature wouldn't even really have to act on those on a regular basis. Right now, it's sort of on a one-by-one basis. They up or down vote each one. Obviously, they usually bundle things together and, as you know, try to do it. But each individual city has to make an individual ask and have individual legislation put together. The idea was to try to formulate these rules. As our legislative folks at Metro Cities have told us, it doesn't look like those rules are going to get written in time for this session, and there's just too much of a stalemate at the legislature right now to get those rules in place, and so we're probably each on our own again. But those rules are going to be in the background and kind of formulating, I think, some of the decision making here. And it's what part of what led to the moratorium. That was the whole idea. If you know the rules around moratoriums, the idea is that you study something in the meantime, right? So they put a moratorium on these to study it, and they never quite got to the finish line of having that study result in some rules. So that is still a possibility that those rules come into play. Still a possibility that they decline everybody and try to make these rules. Of course, none of us can control that other than to call our representatives. And so the mayor and I have spoken with all three of ours and got their general support for our initiative.
Okay, anything else on this one? So you'll bring this forward on Monday then?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, yes, thank you.
Just a quick note is that the reason it's coming Monday is that there's a January 31st deadline to put this in front of the committees that handle it at the legislature. So that is, we need to take action on Monday if we're going to be in this round of consideration.
Right. 5B strategic plan work.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and Council, I put together a draft of strategic plan for 2026, and it is part the reiteration of what the consultant came up with for what I would call the first two priorities here, and then the next three are ones that we've sort of formulated based on conversations with the council over the past year, a little bit of some of the information that came out at the retreat that didn't necessarily make it into those last two. And as you know, we were time constrained, even though it was kind of an all-day deal, it still, it was tough to get through all the things. And so we are bringing this back to you in an attempt to kind of move it forward and see the reaction to these final three especially. I think obviously we're pretty bought into the first two. I wanted to expand on those a little bit, but then introduce these next three to you as well. We also put together some sort of what I would call, I don't want to call them a mission statement or a vision statement, but I sort of liken it to the strategic plan answering the questions of why and what, and then from there we would take this to staff to bring back the how and when. So just addressing the question of when for a bit, we call this the 2026 strategic plan, but it's probably, there are items on here that will be a 1-year turnaround, there will be items on here that are a 5-year turnaround. It'll be a bit of a living document that we revisit each year and continue on with it, unless there's different direction from council to make a finite timeline on it. But I think each item will kind of have a different horizon, time horizon on it.
Rick, I wasn't sure what
What's that?
two of them up there, so.
Yeah, I'll grab that. So as I mentioned, we have the sort of the takeaways from the retreat and then set of draft priorities. Retreat takeaways were that we had 2 major strategic priorities. One was invest in improved infrastructure, and the second one was attract businesses, development and redevelopment. As I mentioned, the retreat was time constrained. We didn't have a chance to fully vet all the other things that we discussed that day, and or maybe we didn't get a chance to discuss it in terms of brainstorming. So we prepared some additional strategic priorities. These are the 5 strategic priorities that we're proposing. Again, the first 2 there, invest in infrastructure and attract businesses, development and redevelopment. The third, 4th and 5th are a bit more about some of the cultural, philosophical initiatives that I think our council is leaning towards. And I want to emphasize that while these are staff recommended additions, these are our attempt to capture your vision. And it's important that we remind ourselves that this is your vision, not staff's vision, right? This is the vision of the city council, this is the strategic plan of the city council. And so these are things we want to make sure that we've properly captured. So it's your job tonight and as we move forward to make sure that we're properly capturing your vision, not just nodding and saying that's a good vision, Mark. I like that. We want to make sure that this is your vision. Again, I sort of put forward these statements just to make sure we understand what these things mean, a little bit of expansion on what each of these succinct strategic priorities mean. So good infrastructure is the backbone of a well-run city. And the meat and potatoes, we can discuss whether meat and potatoes is the appropriate term. Meat and potatoes of work that tax dollars should support. Deferring maintenance on our infrastructure is a short-term solution which makes for long-term problems. With the long view in mind, we are committed to staying on track with our capital improvement plans. I think we're on a path to this already with our the budget we set. While we did utilize some new revenue streams to lower the levy, we did not let that lower our contributions to the capital funds. Right? We maintained our, sustained the amount of money we're putting in the street fund and the parks fund. In terms of our long-term CIP, we didn't ask anyone to shave things off of their capital plan in terms of the parks or the streets. So I think we're heading in that direction, but again, this has to be something that the council is fully bought into. I think there's had some discussion today at our staff meeting about whether or not infrastructure includes capital equipment, so trucks and even our software, say, those types of things that are a little bit less infrastructure-y, but still maybe in that same category of maintaining a sustainable capital plan that invests in the ongoing quality of those assets. Then we have the attract more business development and redevelopment. We're saying growth is a marker of a thriving community. Redevelopment is an indication of its sustainability. Ensuring conditions are right for continued private investment means we can grow the tax base, the denominator in our equation. Business can lower the burden on the average resident and provide the services that make our city as good as it sounds. Again, here I think we're acknowledging that growth is good, as long as it can be sustainable, and pursuing redevelopment, even in a city that has development potential, can be challenging sometimes when you have greenfield sites that are easy to build on. Redevelopment can be challenging, but I think we have good and desirable redevelopment sites. We saw that at the last city council's and EDA work session. So, as I maybe mentioned before, some people will define economic development as setting the conditions for development, not necessarily pushing development or doing development, but setting the conditions for that. So that when it comes, you're ready for it, that you're have conditions that are inviting to people. So I think that's part of that statement there. And then we've talked about, again, the idea of growing the tax base so that even if our levy increases are a little bit higher than we'd like, the tax rate increases are less because we have a growth on the bottom side of that tax equation. The next three,
Mark, can you just go back to that, unless you have more bullet points on each one after you go through these overviews?
yeah, I do.
Do you? Okay, go ahead, sorry.
So again, these are kind of the mission statements of each of these, or just the enhancement, and then we'll have some more sort of nuts and bolts ideas here afterwards. Enhanced community pride. Forest Lake does a lot of things right, and its citizens care deeply about their town. It is important that the city fosters this pride of ownership by doing the same thing we ask our residents and businesses to do. Our actions or inactions are a reflection on the community, not just our government. So acknowledging that the work of the government is the work of the community, and acknowledging that when we do things well, our community feels good about that, and that there's value in doing our best and having a high standard for our work. And we ask that of our community members, and should ask that of ourselves. Obviously, we can all think of a couple of years past where we've done some of those things that were not met with good reactions from our community because we sort of didn't hold ourselves to the same high standards. This statement, it tries to again make that tie between what the government does and what our community is. Perhaps this statement could use a little bit more tie-in with our relationship with our community organizations, whether it's the Chamber of Commerce or it's the Lions Club or the Rotary, veterans organizations, all those folks who help in our schools, folks that make our community a well-rounded place to live, and that's certainly a part of this as well. We also discussed at our staff meeting today just the tie here to our volunteer fire department. That's a certain sense of community pride. And so again, here we have a little bit of crossover maybe between the built environment, things we can see and touch, and sort of our human capital and the relationships that we have, and the importance of those. So that's enhancing community pride. And we have build organizational resilience. Over the past decade or two, we've seen the city do its best to stabilize after the difficult task of merging the city and township. There was some discussion today about maybe Mark Stotts is mentioning the city and township, but maybe that's 2.5 decades ago, we should let it go at this point. And I think that's not a bad thought, maybe that's an outsider's perspective, and the rest of the community is a bit ready to move on from that. And I think maybe it's just healthy to, whether some people are ready to move on or not, maybe it's just healthy to do that. So we can talk about whether or not that really needs to be included in this mission statement here, but then instability can bring with it a host of issues which lead to inefficiency, ineffectiveness, and waste. Investors steer clear of risk and gravitate towards calm waters. Slow and steady wins the race. This intends to talk about things such peaks and valleys? Do we shave off the peaks, lift up the valleys, and have a bit more of a steady line, a trend line that doesn't have big spikes? And I think we did some of that this year again, right? We shaved off what would have been a pretty good sizable peak. Necessarily, that means next year's, that would have been a valley, is not quite as much of a valley as it was before. But maybe that's good in the long view of things. I know that other communities embrace this as well, especially when it comes to budgeting. I think, we've talked about some of the things that, again, setting conditions for people to want to come here, not only as developers, but say employees, right? Attracting employees, attracting businesses. All those things are helped by an organization that is stable and resilient and can take a punch or two and keep moving. So I think the things we can do we'll explore some of the things we can do to make that goal a reality. And then the last one we've got here is normalize engaged governance. The term community engagement has become a buzzword cities are striving to meet. We believe engagement can be built from the inside out. Rather than hoping citizens will engage, we meet them where they are and look to serve them at the expense of our own convenience. Again, today in our staff meeting, we talked about whether or not this doesn't necessarily, we don't mean to say that people here are doing things because it's convenient for them. That wasn't the intent here. I probably would use some wordsmithing here, but we want to make sure that we are going just a bit above and beyond the minimums, right? And so in order to meet our citizens where they are, might mean that we get off of what the state statute says we have to do and get to a spot where we're doing things that we want to do because we think it's right for our citizens. Might mean if we say the statute says we gotta send out mailers to people 350 feet around the site, maybe we make it a policy, we always go 500 feet. Just making things up as I go along here, but you get the general intent. I think more and more communication style is important. You see more and more cities and counties doing things that are graphically pleasing, easy to read. It's called the USA Today version of information. That sort of, I want to call it dumbed down, but just easier to digest information. For instance, this particular slide is not maybe as visually pleasing as it could be. It's a lot of words, right? Are there better ways to communicate? I recently forwarded some information about a community that was doing its annual budget presentation as a video. They put out a 2-minute video on what does their tax dollars go to, and it was a well-produced little video about here's our new park and how we built this, and then there's a guy full of potholes, and then there's a guy, so it was an effort that took staff time and effort, but that was done purposefully in order to reach people that weren't paying attention to the city budget before, right? And it got a few thousand views versus 12 people that might show up to the budget, right? So with that, I'd ask for some just initial reaction, unless you want me to roll into the next set of bullet points here. I've got sort of some thoughts on everything. I don't know if we'll go through those bullet list by bullet list, but any thoughts maybe on the general intent of these items?
Yeah, I like them. I like the addition, and I think we talked after the retreat, how, I felt like the materials that you guys had produced for our time together, there was a summary there that didn't get addressed, which was a miss, frankly. So I'm glad that you pulled, some of those key things back in, because I would agree with all 5 of these personally. Yeah, maybe a little wordsmithing, little chat GPT, my friend, on some of these mission statements. But I think for the most part, you, from my perspective, really captured it. Maybe the one that doesn't quite resonate with me relative to like the mission statement is the focus of the build organizational resilience. Not that that shouldn't be a priority, it absolutely should. I'm not quite sure from my own perspective if that mission statement is capturing the essence of the challenges that I feel like the organization has had over the last couple of years, but it's certainly probably a factor. Because, you know, I definitely want for the Austin team, you know, that is in the room, that we have this resilience and put ourselves, you know, continue to put ourselves in the best position forward as we're engaging with developers and, you know, prospective business movement town. So I like that. I mean, not quite sure if that mission statement's quite hitting it, but right, it's in the right vein.
Yeah, I would, you know, as far as these three additional ones, I like to enhance the community pride and the idea around, including those, community groups, nonprofits, Rotary Lions, fire, and specifically the school, our relationship with the school district, and not just the district, but all the schools in the city, I guess. I like that a lot. The other two, I think are important to call out, but probably not as important as those first two, of course, and then the third one here, I really do like. The township and the city thing, it's nice to recognize the history there. So I could go either way if that wanted to be included or not, you know, people, we still hear from them, you know, and so I don't know, I could go either way on that, but I like moving forward, but you need to recognize your history, your past as well.
Thoughts?
Other than our retreat, how much time has been spent on this plan?
I mean, it's hard to quantify sometimes because it's bits and pieces that I collect, in terms of actual staff time putting this together. Maybe another 10, 15 hours of my thoughts put them together.
Has other department heads all weighed in on this, other than just today, or?
Not in a real formal way, no. You know, we did, obviously the department heads were at the meeting where we set the first two goals, and some of this is carryover from that. I think the organizational resilience item was actually, you know, part of the summary that was, we get to as Leif mentioned. We had some opportunity for feedback this morning. I think that there's a, if I can speak for the staff, I'll certainly let them speak for themselves, but I think there's maybe a little bit of a concern that there's too much here, and that, what are the expectations? Can we do all of this all at once? Is it too much of a laundry list, especially if you go to my next couple slides with bullet points? And is that realistic without the next shoe dropping, which is, well, we're gonna need more staff to do these more things and more resources to do these more things, right? So I think there's part of that.
Does everybody have a chance to kind of weigh in and give their thoughts, opinions, or whatever on this?
I hope people feel free to do that.
I know there's some that are not here, I was just curious as far as a whole, it's a group effort, I think, not only on their point, but our point as well,
Yeah,
so.
and again, I wanna stress that this is not the staff's strategic plan. This is the council's strategic plan. We wanna hear staff's concerns with executing it. These are either things that you wanna do or they're not, right? Staff's opinion is important as to whether or not we can implement these things and whether or not they are prudent, right? We wanna hear from staff to say, are you guys crazy? Come on, what are you doing? But at the same time, the idea is that this is a plan that you've been elected to the city in a direction, right? And if this is your direction, that's the way, that's the route the staff is gonna take.
I just wanna make sure that everybody's had a chance to voice their thoughts, their input, they see things on a day-to-day basis, maybe that we don't always see, maybe we
Yeah.
hear secondhand or whatever, but I think maybe I can speak a little bit on our behalf, that we value their opinions and their approach to things and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And we appreciate their weighing in on important issues, topics, and the future. I think we kind of voice our mission where we'd like to go with it, and we wanna make sure that we're all in the same boat or support each other's actions.
Absolutely. Do we wanna run through any of these, or do we wanna, obviously, we're not gonna just adopt this, we'll come back to you, in the next few meetings here with some additional thoughts, incorporating what we talked about tonight, incorporating further staff input. We do have a version of this that I have a version of this that I created after this morning's staff, and that's a little, the one thing we sort of did was maybe, 3 and 4 felt like maybe they could be combined if we were looking to reduce the weight of this whole thing, and if it just felt too bulky. 3 and 5 seemed to, I was able to take the bullet points and kind of redistribute them amongst the other 4. If that was something that council wanted to see, was just, in general, is it just easier to follow 4 things than it is to follow 5? Easier for the community to understand.
And maybe after, later this week, you could circulate that with all the council, people that are here. And then, what's kind of the desired timeline around adoption? You mentioned the next couple of meetings where.
Yeah, I look back at the timeline that I presented when we first got into this, and we're a little behind on this presentation, but the adoption, Q1 was sort of review a draft and start getting community input, and then end of Q1 was sort of adoption.
So, maybe, give us a chance to kind of dig deeper in with the truncated version, that you have built based on staff input, and we can provide, whether it be in another workshop or just a email response, say, here's, kind of some things that, my thoughts on it, and work towards a more adoption-ready document.
So on the 2 that we, as a group, walked away with back in October, whenever that was, can you go to the bullet points on those, maybe?
And I'll just remind everybody, we had, these are from that report, so I didn't
Okay.
reinvent these.
Okay.
I consolidated them a little bit, just because there were 10 of them on each one, and it felt like a lot.
All right, so that was when I asked earlier before, in your presentation, the development of toolbox, including TIF and different things, and so I'm glad that that's included in there. I think if that's what this council wants, I think that's real important, that the public knows that we want to do these types of things. The public, the developers, whatever, that this is a priority of ours and that it's called out in this, so glad to see that is still part of it.
Yeah, one of the things, as long as we're right here, that was some staff feedback today, was whether or not there should be something, and I think we did sort of ask this question out loud. I think the last time we presented, I think I presented the report from the consultant, maybe a workshop or 2 ago, and asked out loud again this question of whether or not there should be something surrounding fiscal constraint, or here we say responsible tax structure. I think you can look to organizational resilience and maybe glean some of that from that item. But it does seem like it's a focus, right? We spent a lot of time getting that levy number down. We got a lot of citizens that voiced those concerns. Most of the commentary wasn't about what we're spending, but just how much we were spending. need to be an item that's focused on that particular thing, or is that an element of each of the items, that each of our things be, or each of the things we're doing are always going to be influenced by fiscal restraint?
Mr. Mayor, this morning when we saw this and had an opportunity to discuss this real briefly, I did suggest maybe asking the council if they would be interested in having a financial sustainability and stability action plan or strategic plan component to this, because it is something that we spend a lot of time on, both staff and the council. And it feels like it almost should be a standalone issue because it is such an important topic. Of course, it trickles over into everything that we do, but it's clear from the residents here in this community and the time that we spend, going through these budget exercises, that it's a significant issue to this council, and you guys made just massive moves with this last budget from where we started to where we went from. But maybe we need to start planning a little bit better and make that a focus of this council and for staff, that we're not starting at those high numbers. We're looking at these things in a more holistic, comprehensive way from everything that we do, not just when we're talking about setting our next year's budget. And I think if that was one of our strategic plans, it could be beneficial to the council as a whole and beneficial for our residents.
So when you say massive moves, are you talking from where the levy started to where it
Great.
landed?
Because it was significant, right?
And it's not the first time we've done that, right? As I understand it, the last couple of years we've been gone that route, right?
Yeah, but to the comment earlier, the point earlier, I think we did that, but we did not pull back on contributing money to the capital funds and all the rest of it. I think we were able to, everyone was able to get pretty much what they wanted, or
Yeah.
maybe not everything, but I think it was a win-win. And we got to a place where staff, we didn't have fully fund all the police positions, but other than that, we funded every single position, if I'm remembering it correctly. And so, I think that was a good process to start. I'm okay with, maybe that, I don't know, maybe that's
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I certainly don't disagree on the outset. I know, at least personally coming into this position, this honor to serve, the focus was let's get our infrastructure funding right. Let's get our staff right. And, and parks is part of that. And so while certainly the last 3 years of budget exercises have been daunting and time consuming, to be sure. I think they were valuable. So I'm just trying to think where that would fit in. Not that it should be a strategic action. I'm just trying to think of how that fits in terms of, what is that saying from the standpoint that if that's a standalone thing, does it trump expenses on infrastructure or staff, or that's where my concern kind of
Yeah,
bleeds in a little bit.
I think if staff has a little bit more time with this, we could bring something back to you that might have maybe just some other suggestions to maybe incorporate that a little bit better.
I feel like this year's budget looked very different, or I should say, budget exercise, if you will, in part because really timing's off, but I think, Mark, it was your first run at it. And one of the versions was going from previous administrators' kind of budget modeling methodology to one that wasn't quite as conservative from the standpoint that I think there was a lot of overinflated numbers, not that we overspend, but budgeting conservatively by we're up here. And so I think that was one of the exercises that brought it down quite a few points in and of itself.
It was, yeah.
And so, I know, Mark, you and I have had a conversation about, let's not, one of the feedbacks we get from citizens all the time, is, well, you guys start up here so you can feel like you're bringing it down here. And, you know, I can appreciate their perspective, and, you know, they may or may not be conscious of the constraints that we're under, right, from September 30th to the end of the year. And so there's some, I think, some justification, honestly, to create some space, but it really doesn't have to be 10-point spread or whatever it's been, right?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like this is somewhat related, but a little off topic, but if there's a concern with that big drop from staff, maybe it's us setting, more realistic expectations of what we want early on, so that that first run is a little bit more of in line with maybe what the sense is to what the council would be agreeable to.
I think that's correct, Mr. Mayor, and Ellie is, and I have discussed already, kind of moving up that timeline. Even though we have a timeline that starts pretty early, we've talked about some real basic, building blocks of the budget being moved up in the decision tree, to, I don't know what, Ellie, April, we maybe talked about it.
You'll have your first budget item coming up in the February workshop, so.
And I think, you know, just setting some, like you say, some of those expectations early. You know, a lot of what we were looking at again was a 10-year plan, and then maybe it's having a refocus on that 10-year plan, so that we again shave off the peaks and valleys with that 10-year plan, as opposed to each year starting anew and saying, okay, how are we gonna shave this year's peaks or valleys? We can take a longer view of things. I appreciate the idea of having a separate fiscal item, tax item, and I'm not opposed to it. I do think, organizational resilience could encompass that idea, if we build out that philosophy of resilience being stability and resilience maybe being one and the same. Maybe it's organizational stability. I felt like that was maybe a little too negative of a word. That was some other feedback we got this morning from staff, was that some of these things just sound a little too negative. And with some wordsmithing, it could be a little bit more of a positive spin on things. Certainly that's good feedback.
Just on the last item, as far as engagement, I do like the idea, and that would be a council decisions. And I've run into this before in the past where, for example, the billboard that was fairly new when I first got on council, the digital billboard, and the fact that people that were living on Clear Lake that could see it outside their window were not noticed at all, because it didn't fit, it was statute and maybe going above and beyond what statute requires, I think is important. I mean, people appreciate that. And so, whether that's a standalone in that, or if it could be, these three can be somehow combined, or two of those can be combined, I like that idea of going above and beyond statute. Again, we're getting a little probably too deep in the weeds individually on some of these things, but, it was brought up, and I like that idea.
I think just another bit of backdrop here too that I can offer is that anytime you're doing a strategic plan, you have to recognize that we're not starting from scratch. So we're not building a city here from ground zero. We're building off of the work of people for decades, right? And there's a lot of great things that have been done here, a lot of great things that we continue to do here. And a lot of these are going to recontextualize what we're already doing, and hopefully celebrate some of those things that we're already doing, that we recognize are on the right path. But there's always, it wouldn't be a strategic plan if we just said, keep doing what we're doing. That's not much of a plan, right? There's always going to be a need for change, the sort of the Japanese mantra of continuous improvement, right? And so there's always that tough thing to, as an organization, admit we could do something better when we feel like, well, we're doing it so good already. How can we do it better, right? And, that's change management, right? 101, management 101 is how do we get an organization to admit that even if we're doing something pretty doggone good, we can still try to do it better. And especially when we're resource constrained, right?
Yeah.
And
looking at those bullets on the next page, I mean, I feel like there's a lot of that stuff that is already in motion.
Right,
You know?
absolutely. And again, it's maybe just recontextualizing it to say we wanna keep doing more of that. Right? And there may even be some of that in the more robust plan that we develop at some point for public consumption that talks about things that we're already doing, things we might do above and beyond that, right? Again, I think it's important that we reevaluate what we're already doing, right? Do we wanna continue to have a Facebook page? You know, do we wanna instead have a Snapchat page or, those are things that need to be evaluated and reevaluated all the time, right? And so having a Facebook page is going above and beyond what we need to do by statute, right? But this is gonna remind us that that's a good thing, and then reevaluate whether or not that's something going forward, and or is there some other things. And are there things that we need to eliminate? Because again, if we're resource constrained and we have a group of people, resources that are being fully utilized, how can we do more? That's tough, right? And so maybe having things, maybe things we have to look at is we don't do that.
I think that's a good point. I mean, we really are, I believe we're hitting the mark on a lot of these things already. And so it's just how do you improve that and make it better? You know, it's we're doing a good job on a lot of these things, so. Is that enough
That's
to
enough for
give
me.
you a little bit of guidance?
I maybe just ask another staff if they have any, thoughts on their head that they wanna get out there.
The only thing, I just didn't watch all the slides, did you guys take a look at the bullets on the new items? And provide feedback, I know Mark said we might go through them, one by one, but it seems, prudent for you to at least take a look at them, see that you're in agreement, things like that.
I think Leif suggested that get pushed out to us, then we can take a look at that and
Yeah, kind of the truncated one
Yeah.
that, is fresh since your staff meeting, and then provide feedback on that, that's good.
because there's a lot there. I understand it, does that?
Yeah, I mean, you're, having your eyes on it and making sure you fully read through the things that you're, at least directing us right now, right? It's not a first option.
Yeah, there's certainly meaty things in here. I mean, I don't need to buzz over. We're talking about, commercial fire inspections. That's Ms. Pascal, that's not necessarily in this plan yet today. That's a big ask. Rental inspections, was on here at some point, consider rental inspections. That's a even bigger ask. And maybe something we don't even wanna do yet, right? And, we might be 3 to 5 years out from that. And I know, that might not be even Alan's, department, that might be Abby's department. And again, we don't have the staff or resources to do that. And where's that money gonna come from to do that? It's not a money-making proposition to do rental inspections. But is it something we want our city to do? A lot of cities our size have that, to maintain a certain level of mobility for these rental properties. So there's some meaty stuff here that you're gonna wanna mull over.
Well, and maybe give a little feedback on some of those things you just called out that are, we know today that are major constraints from a resource standpoint, that don't even necessarily make them feasible to think about in the next 12 or even 24 months, let's say. Would you like council's feedback to take them off, put them in the parking lot for the 2028 strategic plan, or is it reasonable to leave them on there, but put an asterisk next to them because we know that they're not gonna happen in 26?
See, I think it'd be reasonable to leave them on there, and, as we build this out into a more, well-vetted plan with timelines and those types of things, that we would start to identify things on a 1-year plan, things on a 3-year plan, things on a 5-year plan, right? And maybe have some, extrapolation of those ideas, right, into more timely.
And some of them are aspirational.
Yeah, I think the question for you as a council is, do you ever wanna do that? You don't have to, there's no rule that says you have to do rental inspections, lots of cities don't. goal is to enhance community pride and have a different aesthetic and a different livability to our community. That's one of those ways you get there, right? And we don't want to do any more code enforcement than we're already doing. This says code enforcement expansion. We just voted on making our guy go from 14 hours to 32 hours. Maybe that's as far as we want to go. Yeah, that's right. So, well, those are things that, you know, we'll want your feedback on for sure. Right. Okay.
Thanks.
You bet.
5C, police chief interview process.
So, Mr. Mayor and Council, we put in front of you here is just really an outline of the process that the Personnel Committee, Jeff and Kevin, have kind of discussed here in terms of wanting to do an internal process first and foremost, and then what does that internal process look like? So we kind of have different things here that we're looking at, which is, I guess first I've listed the job description and minimum preferred qualifications. That's in front of you right now in paper form, and we can take a brief look at that, but it's the first time you're seeing it, so we certainly can just buzz over it and consider it for the next time when we ask you on probably Monday to endorse this job description. It's a job description that we hadn't updated in a long time because we hadn't needed to. We had a police chief here for 14 years. And so we looked at another number of different communities, agglomerated those things together, modernized some of the language, and have a pretty decent job description here, we think. So please give us your feedback on that. Essentially, I think most folks know what a police chief does. It's just a matter of trying to write that down. Sometimes it's a bit tough. Obviously, you're doing all the duties. You're managing all the functions of a police department. Maybe some of the things that stand out to me were sort of the bullet point that says operates as the face of the department. And we have to remind ourselves that the police chief is the person in front of the microphone. You don't have to watch too much news these days to know that that's a very important role. When something happens in your community, they don't want to talk to the city administrator. They might want to talk to the mayor, and probably want to talk to the police chief, right? Sometimes the mayor and police chief are standing side by side. So it's important, I think, as we go through this, that Mr. Mayor and council, that you think about how that police chief's gonna present themselves standing next to the mayor at a podium. Let's hope we never have to get to that spot, or let's hope it's for some reason that we saved a drowning kid or something like that, right? But you know, that's something we want to be very considerate of. The role of police chief in today's world is much different than it was 25 years ago. We have to acknowledge that. So please take a look at this over the next few days and give us any feedback you might have. Again, we decided to go the direction of internal candidates. We have a number of people who would be qualified and who may put in an application for the position. The interview process is the next step. If we, whether we get one candidate or 3 or 4, we want to go through the interview process. Again, certainly if we have one candidate even, it's important to still go through that process because you may not end up hiring that person at the end of that process. You may just think that they're not as qualified as you might have previously thought. A number of communities have done the process here where you have multiple panels interview a police chief, again, because it's a very important position that does lend itself to wanting to see different perspectives. And so I know that other departments have invited chief law enforcement officers from other departments, neighboring departments, or maybe some high-ranking captain level positions, deputy sheriffs, those type of things. So we would invite a panel of 3 to 5 of those folks to interview, someone that might be working in an adjacent jurisdiction. And then, a conglomerate of staff and the personnel committee, so, in my view, the city administrator, assistant city administrator, and fire chief, obviously because the fire chief is part of public safety and he works alongside the police chief in a number of capacities, that would be a good person to have on that board. And then, those would be the 2 interview panels that I would suggest. Some communities do a third, maybe community members and those type of things, but that's certainly, I would take that input. I think 2 is probably sufficient here, but, open to further discussion. And then I've kind of outlined a timeline here for having this position decided upon in time for chief's retirement on April 3rd, so we have a smooth transition without delay. This timeline certainly is up for tweaking. I know that the chief has a vacation planned that might not allow him to sit on those interview panels in this current configuration, so we might try to rearrange that a little bit. I do think that the existing chief, there's always that question of whether or not you want the existing chief to weigh into the new chief. I think it's when you've got a chief that's been here a long time and it's a very trusted member of the community, I don't see why you wouldn't ask that opinion and involve him, but that's certainly something I take input on as well. So tonight we're just sort of looking for head nods on whether or not this process seems appropriate. This is the recommendation, I think, generally of the personnel committee. Jeff, do you have any other thoughts?
A couple of things. One, I think a decision needs to be made if you're gonna go internal or external. With that, we do have some very good candidates here, at the police department. Some of them, or I should say, most of them meet all the qualifications that are in the job description and then some. I think maybe you go outside, and I mentioned this before, if you go outside of our agency, you risk the possibility of bringing on somebody that has a conflict with personality and other issues within the department. That could cause some problems, could be poisonous to the current staff that you have. There's a different style of leadership. From what I've seen and looked around through the department in my past and coming here as a council member, that the police department seems to run in a very well-functioning manner. There's not conflict, there's not issues with personalities and so forth. If you bring somebody in and they have that different style, you're gonna lose the good people that you currently have or have worked so hard to get. But I don't know. I think that we do have a good choice of internal candidates. And if we put something out there, if they're interested in the chief's position, then we go from there.
So can I ask, Jeff, so was that not the initial recommendation from the personnel committee?
That's what I believed it was, that it stayed within the internal candidate, because we have a good candidate or candidates for the chief of police. I think if we put something out there, you're gonna be spending some money on the process, and you're gonna be delaying what's in the front.
So, is staff suggesting something different?
No.
Okay. All right. Okay. Not quite following. I thought that was, I think that when we, last meeting, I referenced that, I thought that was the plan, so.
I'd still like to believe that that's still the plan. I don't know, there's some kind of mix and confusion amongst some of the stuff that's been kind of brought forward and said. And, I think maybe even in this timeline thing, we could probably shorten it up a little bit, or at least get on the right page, because we're gonna have, there's gonna be some things that the police department needs to look at as far as bringing things forward. I'm just gonna do a hypothetical. If we do go with the captain to the chief, and then if you promote from within one of the sergeants to the captain's position, then you have to backfill that with a sergeant. So there has to be interviews and testing and so on and so forth within the police department to backfill that position. So now you have a sergeant's vacancy open, now you have just patrol officers that will probably need to test and so on and so forth within that to keep filling the gaps.
Would those decisions typically be made by the new chief or be involved with?
I believe that would probably be the new chief. The new chief should pick his captain. I wouldn't want somebody, have the council pick my second in command. I think that person should have the, same integrity, you know, and everything else is what the chief wants. I don't think it's if we want to look at it as a qualifying person, that's fine, but they make the decision when they're gonna have a second in command.
I've not seen a timeline, right?
So that's, if you care to look at it, you're more than welcome to.
Well,
I printed it out. So I think some of that area probably could be short, but if you are gonna stick with them, the internal candidate.
We wanna sort of, you wanna sort of chief it for
It would probably give him some time to get his feet and everything. I know, well, if it is, let's say it is Mr. Captain Hannibal, I know they work together on things, they have a pretty good understanding of things, but, they could swing things around to, who's gonna be your second in command, the captain's position, and so on and so forth.
I guess personally, I think, you know, to your point, Rick's tenure here and a well-run, you know, organization, as much input as you're willing to put into this would be great. I appreciate this council, but, you know, so that's important to me.
Yeah, and I agree with the recommendation of having internal candidates and go from there. I'm very proud of our department and succession planning that we've been doing over the years. Even when I first started here, you know, I think our officers have great training, a lot of leadership training, if they want to take it or not. And I think it speaks volumes to the department as well that, you know, we do give them great training. And you start looking externally, I think Councilmember Larson really stated it well that, you know, they could cause some morale issues and things like that as well.
I guess the one question I had from your presentation, I'm agreeable to everything else that was shared. Just, is there, peruse this, is there anything in here that speaks to close work that the police chief and the fire chief do together? And over the last handful of years, there's been a back and forth about emergency management from being fire versus police. I mean, should that, today it's under fire, right? But I mean, should there be anything around that or that close working relationship in the job description, or is that just assumed within the industry?
I think that's a good question, and I don't know that there is a lot of stuff in here about cooperation with the other emergency management personnel. It certainly doesn't say that they are expected to be the emergency manager, because that isn't the current case, but certainly I can see that as other duties to be a part of emergency response for large disaster type stuff and cooperate with the emergency manager, something along those lines.
And I would think, you know, having his new chief taking that role on it, I would suspect that he would stay with the current situation.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I think they collaborate well together.
I give you some background. So, emergency management has always fallen under fire. And then when previous fire chief Sifranius retired, it moved into law enforcement, and Greg Weiss became the emergency manager, and I became the assistant emergency manager. It was a great time. That's when active shooters started to escalate, and so that's where the focus was going in emergency management, is how do we deal with this increasing active shooter atmosphere that we in, and that was really a law enforcement type issue, and Captain Wayne did a great job with dealing with the school district, working with other businesses in the community and getting our departments, both police and fire, up to where we needed to be to deal with those type of situations. And then when Captain Weiss retired, it reverted back to fire, and then Captain Hanegraaff became the assistant emergency manager. So it's kind of gone back and forth, but in each instance, it's either been the captain that was emergency manager and fire chief was assistant, or vice versa.
And they work hand in hand. I'll speak for Al, or I'll just wanna state a couple things, is that when Greg was the emergency manager and Al was the assistant, I mean, their relationship, they're always working together. I mean, hand in hand. Just because one had the title, didn't mean there's, you know, the collaboration was huge. And now just with Al being the emergency manager and Luke being the assistant, once again, that relationship and collaboration is fantastic. I watch them all the time, working hand in hand, and the meetings they have and decisions that are made and everything else. So it works really well.
So maybe that, like, just called out, is more important than the captain's job description than the chief's job description, is that fair?
I'm saying.
Well, I just called out that in this job description, I didn't see anything related to emergency management.
Oh.
As related to the police chief. So based on what you just shared, it sounds like it's maybe more germane to the chief or at least captain's job description.
What I'm saying is that they work so much hand in hand that I don't think it really matters. But when you really look at the emergency managers, when you look at emergency management, as Al mentioned, there was a lot of that with the active shooter and those types of things. But realistically, it's really weather related, you know, for any kind of emergency management. So I think that's why it does fall under fire.
So is the term or the title of Director of Public Safety, that seems to be more of a term that you hear, is that someone that's actually overseen typically in an organization, both fire and police? Or am I, maybe not, maybe the perception's different, but it just seems like that title of Director of Public Safety is now the new term for the police chief. Maybe I can explain here.
No, so Director of Public Safety is when you do oversee police and fire.
Okay.
And if I remember correctly, back when Dave Schwartz had that title, and it just kind of stuck with Clark querying in with me, that was when the fire chief was volunteer, is that correct?
Correct. So we don't need, so we wanna call this out what it is, it's a chief of police, right? It's not a Director of Public Safety that we're hiring.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, I know Lionel Lakes with that model, they had a whole different system they were gonna implement where firefighters were police officers and vice versa, but I think it just adds a level of management that you don't necessarily need at a town this size, right? We're 80,000 people, it's a little different.
I'm good with the timeline and internal focus.
Can I just discuss the timeline a little bit? And I apologize, Mark, I
Oh,
didn't have a
sure.
chance to look at this
Yeah.
before today.
Yeah.
But I feel like we could expedite this timeline a little bit. I don't know that if we're doing an internal search and it's going to be an internal candidate, and if the folks conducting the interviews and the personnel committee are comfortable with that internal candidate, I don't know that we need to go to second round interviews. I feel like we can kind of hit on all of those important questions during the first round interview. I think it might be prudent that we have the personnel committee make a recommendation prior to March so that we can then expedite or start those processes to get that captain position filled. Because that's gonna be a little bit of a process as well, right? Start working with whomever the council ends up choosing as the next chief, and perhaps, you know, Chief Peterson as well. But I worry a little bit about kind of pushing this till March, just because of that domino effect with the other vacancies that will be created.
Right.
So I just wonder if we want to have a little bit of discussion on maybe moving that timeline up a little bit, or maybe asking the personnel committee to look at that a little bit closer.
I don't know, I kind of talked a little bit with Kevin Miller about this as well. And I don't know necessarily if we are doing an internal candidate. Most of these area representatives of other law enforcement agencies, I probably already worked with these folks. I have a good understanding of them. So I don't necessarily know if we need to have like the chief or commander to interview staff, interview with them. I think they already have a pretty good understanding of who these people are.
That's a great point.
So looking at the timeline, the way it's laid out right now, the goal would be to basically make a recommendation by the end of February, so the council's making a voting decision on March 9. So is the goal to try to back that voting decision up to the last meeting in February?
I think so, and I think potentially, I mean, I don't know that we need a week dedicated to a review of applications. I mean, if let's say we get 2 applications and they both meet the minimum qualifications, I don't think it's going to take a week to review them and vet them for that. I just feel like we could bump all this up about a month. My biggest worry is for the department and having that uncertainty and not having, some public-facing movement towards making sure that those vacancies are filled as we're moving forward. I just heard chatter that, there's concern right now that, we might be not moving on this quick enough. And I don't want the folks who work so hard in our PD to feel that, we're not on top of this and then concerning ourselves with that domino effect. It's probably not the right term, but, those backfilling of those other positions. And perhaps it's not as significant for a potential captain vacancy, but it probably is for those potential sergeant vacancies that we might be looking at. So I guess that's in the back of my mind with this.
So whether, if you back it up a couple weeks or not, let's say we stuck with, I hear what you're saying, but what if we stuck with the current timeline? Is there any reason we're waiting until April 3rd to swear in from a March 9th decision?
No, I guess the only question I would have is Chief Emeritus at that point, or is it co-chief, or?
Yeah, I think it'd be a little confusing having 2 chiefs.
Well, it's not just kind of to your point though, or Jeff's, if we back it, even we backed up a couple of weeks, so what happened? So we made a decision at the end of February, that new chief, I assume that is, soon to be new chief is.
Right. I feel like we could, council could, staff will bring a recommendation from the personnel committee, and council could move to approve that hiring recommendation and then declare a vacancy to fill the potential.
Whatever,
If there's
whatever
cap-
role,
Right,
Yeah,
right.
right, just so we can keep that process.
You can certainly, make your motion to make that hiring recommendation and enable that person to start moving things along that will be under that person's purview going forward, right? So, again, if it's the captain, then at least we give that person the opportunity to start interviewing candidates for the captain position.
just give them more runway.
So I guess my only thought changes is that totally fine on internal candidates, whatever, but for transparency, for the public's view, having someone outside of this organization, I mean, not just the police department, but outside of the city, the personnel committee, to have be involved in that, to get that input, I think would be just more transparent, so the public knows that there was someone that, was part of this process that isn't in this building every day or every other week or every Monday. I just think that
And Jeff, were you suggesting that?
to go away with that, you were suggesting go away with that.
I thought it would probably be one of the steps that we could maybe avoid, but if you want to do that as far
I
as the
just think-
transparency issue, I don't really have a problem. I don't see a problem with it, I'm saying.
Yeah, I
I don't see a problem with that. But I think when you're dealing with a lot of this local, the Chisago, Anoka, Washington County, whatever, if it's the sheriff, a chief, a captain, a commander, or whatever, they've all probably worked with.
That's fine, but the public doesn't know that.
I
You know,
understand.
we can have something like some statements or an interview type questionnaire that we have that, you know, memorialized somehow that if something would come back, like, hey, we had an outside person who did know that person has worked with them. I think that just would, well, you know, help us long term, something with it.
That's understandable.
And we have some great community stakeholders here too, you know, the school district, the chamber, and there's different community stakeholders who could also participate as well, and not necessarily just Cleo's. Something we could look at.
It's
So
really
we're-
common.
Yeah.
It's really common for cities to pull in a community, school district to social service nonprofits. Some of those executive directors are there, personnel professionals from the community. Just all they're doing is making a recommendation to the personnel committee and to the council, but they can go on their own community test.
Yeah, either, you know, yeah, that and or, an agency that's in the area that has police experience. Maybe that add more time to it, maybe it does, but I think we don't need to just anoint someone here and then all of a sudden the public gets like, well, wait a minute here, this is, this wants to be transparent and open, and whoever gets this job, is truly qualified, which I think that truly we have a number of people in our department who do that, but I just don't want public facing, I guess.
So just to be clear, does the council feel like, so right now the recommendation would be to have 2 interview panels, one being staff and the personnel committee, the other one would be Cleo's. We wanna have a third panel or maybe just an enhanced second panel, it would be more than 3 to 5 people, it would be maybe 7, 8 people.
I just, it doesn't have to be that large, I think you could maybe mix it up, but I don't think that's be a 7 panel. Or do something like that.
Sure.
Does it have to be on separate dates, like when we were meeting with the city administrator, there was 3 panels and they recorded round robin.
Yeah, we can certainly do that, yeah.
That way it doesn't affect the timeline.
So in general, we'd like to see this timeline constricted, no more than 2 panels, no more than 5-ish people on a panel, or maybe just not 5 Cleos, and we can add a community member or 2 in. See some head nods.
I had the pleasure, when this I knew it was coming, Chief Peterson retiring and stuff, and I had asked if it would be okay if we had a little sit down with him, just to kind of get his thoughts on background and a predecessor and so on and so forth. So I met with Chief Peterson for about an hour and a half, I think it was. And I asked him if he would care if I met with Captain Hanegraaff just to get his feel as far as direction and things like that, what his thoughts on things. And I had a 2-hour conversation with Captain Hanegraaff, and both had very good things to say about the department and things that I asked them, things they would like to see in the future, whether as Chief's predecessor might be, or if Luke was promoted, or what he'd like to see, and had some very good conversation. So, and even the department, some of the people within the department, and the relationships that has been
Got a good leadership for sure. Personnel committee and myself and Delaney were looking at 4 individuals, and he's got some great leadership here. So.
Anything else, Chief, that you'd like to?
Nope.
And then,
No, it's great feedback and appreciate everybody's input. And I think we've got a pretty solid hiring process here, appointment process.
So on your January 26th meeting, we will, that part of the timeline will stay the same, which was we'll have you adopt this process officially and then have a revised timeline for you on that proposed. passes.
goal to make this higher decision on the 23rd.
Yeah, I think that's certainly reasonable.
2 weeks after the application.
Yeah.
Don't know by now.
All right. Thanks everyone on that one. Last item, community liaisons. So,
Thanks, Mayor. I know Mark had sent an email to the council, some time ago regarding liaison appointments, just seeing where everyone's temperature was at. I don't know if there was any feedback from that, I don't believe that there was, but I just wanted to bring this up before we bring this to council for formal adoption. As I explained in my staff memo, it's not necessary that these liaison appointments change every year. It's more typical following an election, is we're moving things around if there's new bodies on the council. But if there's any desire to, move things around with where they sit right now, we can certainly bring that recommendation for adoption next week. Otherwise, if council's okay with things where they are at and appointments where they are at, or liaison designations, we can certainly just leave them as is, so.
so that the desire there was just, we want people who are more vested or have interest in something or another, and making sure the council is fine with continuing that, or the option to change, but jump with that if need be, but it sounds like everyone's fine with where they're at for the last year.
Keith, you had mentioned something at one point, maybe having a liaison, but that came up in conversation, I don't know if you thought about that at all, or what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember where that conversation came from, but it wouldn't be a bad idea to have a certain city council who is the liaison to the police department. We used to have the Police Civil Service Commission, and that was 3 members. It was always good to have that. Just kind of give updates on what's going on, and any ideas. Sometimes it's staffing, or it's not saying we're doing it, but any kind of restructuring or staffing additions, and then that way, that city council member can sit with police chief, have those discussions, kind of like how you do right now with the fire. I think it works well.
I would be open to that, I don't know, if we wanna wait till we have the chief to make that decision. It's
That's something that just came up in a topic, that conversation between Chief and also the captain, it's just a background conversation there.
So what would that look like then, just like a quarterly meeting, one-on-one with a council member and chief?
I think that would work out well. And if there needs to be, bigger decisions being made and things like that, it could be more often, but I think quarterly would not be a bad thing.
So, I'm fine with doing it sooner than that, but what would that require a council vote to add that liaison position?
We just pencil it in on the slate of liaisons here, and have you both slate up or down, or move that one if you like, or keep it in, whatever.
So then with that, would you, suggest that be someone different than who's already in the personnel committee? Or doesn't it matter?
I don't know that it necessarily matters. I think the one thing to be cognizant of is how stretched thin folks are. I know that right now, as we're going through this hiring process, personnel committee will be a little bit busier. Then there's the public works steering committee, but there's still airport guidelines steering committee, and all these different little assignments. They take up time in addition to full-time jobs and families and other commitments. So I think that'd be the one thing to be most cognizant of.
And, let the chief decide that, or do you have any input?
Yeah, what do we maybe do the full council here,
Yeah.
important conversation,
Yeah.
as well as we have a new chief named at least in 6 weeks, so.
But otherwise, the rest, the 3 of you are comfortable with your current assignments?
I know, well, guess what, they all said, oh, you're retired, what do you do? I think I heard somebody say to the town, I think I seen you around here most of the afternoon.
Alright, thank you.
Anything else tonight from staff or council?
Just a quick ask is, does the council find it valuable for us to, from staff, to send out Outlook invites? You know, for council meetings or for your committee meetings, or do you put those reminders on there yourself, or maybe, I don't know how you guys have done in the past.
I just added to my work calendar, it's the only place it lives.
What, do you do yourself or do you prefer staff to send it?
Most of the stuff on stuff, or if we have a special meeting or something like that, they send out that, right, and it's kind of nice. Drop on the calendar.
How, terrible weather, highs and lows, freezing, thawing, how are our friends at the state doing? Any major, potholes to avoid on 61? We had a chance to talk to them at all?
Yeah, I got the one on Domino's fixed, or they got that one fixed, and then, I just keep sending it to them, so I don't know. Unfortunately, that pothole patch is way low on their list, they do all the snow clearing first, and if I catch them, if I keep giving them a big enough list, then they'll probably get all of them at the same time.
It's a salt shortage. Oh, perfect, so we're gonna have salt on the road.
And I think that, you know, that both that with the freezing and thawing cycle starting earlier in the season and then more rain or ice events, with the climate changing, that's just things that Public Works gonna have to, both state and local, have to look at.
Some of our roads too, the 12th Street, Red Dot right now, it's exploding underneath where I was walking, I stay on it to hold it together.
Stay filled.
Yeah, I think it's that to the point that warm freeze, that there's gonna be a lot of potholes this go.
I think you're encouraging them to, remind them about it.
Yeah, everyone I get, I keep forwarding them, it's, from them on the interstate, we can try to help out sometimes, but we're not gonna throw a razor on the interstate.
Yeah.
Draw on some places.
Right, nothing else, we're adjourned, and thanks everyone